Hi friends, welcome to Raising Lifelong Learners. I'm your host, Colleen Kessler, and this is the podcast where I encourage you to trust yourself and your differently wired kiddos as you help cultivate their curiosity, encourage them to discover the world around them, embrace who they are wired to be, all while helping them discover their passions, interests, and raise them to become the amazing adults they're meant to be. Hey, welcome back. This is episode 232. Today I'm talking with Michelle Brownell from Homeschool Essentials. She's fabulous. Michelle and I met years and years ago at a homeschool convention for gifted and special needs kids, and it was great for both of us. We've stayed in touch, and she just has so much to share with the homeschool community. We are talking today specifically about homeschooling when you're in crisis, when you are struggling, your kids are struggling, everything is difficult and a challenge, and what kinds of things you can do to really lean into the little things that make a big difference. So this is just a great episode. You are going to love it, and I would love to hear what you have to say about it. So make sure you drop me a line over on the show notes at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast. Special shout out before we get started to CTC Math, our sponsor. You'll hear more about them later in the episode, but we love CTC Math here at home. I am a customer. I've been a customer for years and years, long before they started sponsoring us. So highly recommend CTC if you're looking for a math program. We're going to get right on with today's episode after a word about another sponsor, Night Zookeeper, which is a great language arts curriculum. You'll hear all about it right now, and then we'll get right on with today's episode. Okay, are you looking for something to kind of shake up what you're doing for language arts? Night Zookeeper just might be the answer for you. We have used Night Zookeeper in the past, but we're back in it this year with my youngest, Isaac. He is just about to start jumping in again, and I'm excited to be able to share on social media some of the things that he's doing with it. But Night Zookeeper is a game-changing language arts program that takes the stress out of teaching because it's fun, it's engaging. Your kiddo is going to love it because it's different than other things. It teaches your child spelling, grammar, punctuation, vocabulary, reading, and writing through a pre-planned language arts curriculum that your kiddo can use independently. I love this because a program like Night Zookeeper frees me up to do one-on-one help with another kiddo while one is doing Night Zookeeper independently. And then, so when Isaac's doing this, he can jump in, he can learn, he can write, he can engage with the word games and the interactive video lessons and the cool, fun, inspiring writing prompts. And then, if he gets stuck or he wants to share something with me, he can pause and come get me and I can go help him, but I don't have to sit there and do it all from start to finish. And let me tell you, having some of those kinds of programs in your back pocket when you are a crazy busy mom of gifted, twice exceptional, and otherwise neurodivergent kiddos is a game changer because you can take it on the go, you can bring your tablet with you, your kiddos can access it from the computer in the family room or the laptop on the go or their Chromebook or whatever. And okay, so here's something super cool. Your kiddo is going to get written feedback on their writing from real tutors. So if they need support or they need to be working on something or they need to add some more describing words or they're messing up their punctuation, you don't have to be the bad guy. I know I'm the bad guy often in my house when I'm trying to get my kids to understand a certain concept. And here you have real tutors at your disposal helping you by assessing and taking a look at your kiddo's writing and giving them feedback. Thousands and thousands of homeschool parents have found success using Night Zookeeper to transform their children's attitude towards language art and writing in particular, and you're going to love it. It's perfect for ages 6 to 12. If you've got an advanced kiddo, you could start them earlier on it. If you've got a kiddo who needs a little bit more support with their reading, writing, vocabulary, or other language arts skills, you can let them jump back into it or stick with it a little bit longer. However you need to use the program, you've got this. Okay, so if you're ready to say goodbye to the stress of teaching language arts, give Night Zookeeper a try. Just head on over to rll.bz/ rll.bz/nightzookeeper, rll.bz/nightzookeeper, all lowercase letters, and you can get a 7-day free trial and 50% off an annual subscription. You cannot beat that. If you can't remember that link, rll.bz/nightzookeeper, you can also head over to the show notes for this episode and find the link there. All right, are you ready? Let's get on with today's episode. Okay, welcome back. I am super excited. I have a guest today that I have wanted to have on the podcast for a long time. We met years and years and years and years ago at a live event, and I love her. I love watching everything she does, how she helps homeschool families, and I love her kids. So I'm super excited to welcome Michelle Brownell to the podcast. Hi, Michelle.
Hey there. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so excited you're here. Okay, so before we get started and dive into all of the things we want to talk about and how we met and all of that, why don't you take a second, introduce yourself, tell a little bit about you and what you do, and maybe, your kids, and just let us know who you are here.
Yeah, sure. So I am Michelle. My husband, Jared, and I have been married for 28 years. And together we parent and homeschool two kiddos who, I don't know if you know this, but we adopted at birth. And they are now 17 and 15. My daughter just turned 15. So we were one of those crazy couples that knew just when we were dating that we wanted to homeschool, but we had no idea what we were getting ourselves into. But we did know that we wanted to create an education that was geared towards how they were wired and their interest and their strengths. But as we went through the process, we started to discover that they did have some unique challenges to their learning. So I became an avid researcher of all of that. And through that journey, just began to help other homeschool parents with that. I help out in another online community called Bright and Quirky that's geared for twice exceptional learners. So we do mentor moments in there. And then from that, the founder of that community encouraged me to start my own, which is Homeschool Essentials. So we meet together in that community and just kind of coach parents and bring in topics. I'm very passionate about the mental health aspect in our homeschool journey. So bringing in topics that are geared on not just education, but parenting and mental health.
Yeah, Michelle does some really great work. I had the privilege of being in the Homeschool Essentials group early on when it was just kind of getting kicked off, and it was a great conversation. So I highly recommend checking that out. I did know, I think it was like on an offhand comment about the kids being adopted, and just it's so interesting because some families you can tell, that the kids were adopted based on, how they look or how everybody interacts. And you guys look like a family. And I absolutely love her kids. So Michelle's kiddos are bright, very quirky. They've been a part of the Learners Lab community off and on throughout the years, and have connected with my own kids via the beauty of the online world. And Michelle and I met, it's been years. I mean, has it been a full 10 years? It might even be.
Yes. Because Tyler was about 8 or 9 when I met you.
Yeah. And it's so wild to see. I just had a chance to say hi to him and to see this senior in high school getting ready to graduate. I was speaking at an event that FPEA had put on for gifted and special needs kids. And oftentimes they just do the special needs piece and not the gifted. So this was kind of one of the few times that they did that. And they brought me in to speak. And Michelle and I talked afterwards about the kids. And
I came running to your booth afterwards after you talked. I was like, I have to go talk to this lady.
Yeah. And that was actually in the beginning, I didn't bring anything. It was me and chocolate, right? Me and chocolate in 2 chairs. And we just sat and chatted. Her kiddo's a lot like my oldest, Trevor. And for those of you listening, right, when we have kids who are so far outside the box and just don't fit, it's amazing to find somebody who you can resonate with and whose story is similar, because we're raising outliers. And so by the very nature of the types of kids who we're raising, it feels like we're alone. It feels like we're the only ones with kids who think in such wild, outside the box ways or behave in these wild ways. Michelle said to me afterwards, after she went home and tried some different strategies that we talked about, that I helped her fall in love with her son again. And I still replay that in my head because it's one of those things that keeps me going and doing
Yeah.
the work that I do while raising my own quirky kids. So I've always appreciated you and your encouragement of me. So thank you for that.
Yeah. It was a marked moment for us in our journey because we were really in a difficult place. And what is interesting about that conference is you mentioned they always had the special needs. And I knew my kids were quirky, but they were bright. So I was like, they don't quite fit in the special needs box. And then when they had the gifted and special needs, I was like, okay, this is intriguing. Let me go see what they have to say about, because they didn't fit in the gifted box either. But
Right.
because it was gifted and special needs, I was like, let me go see. And that's when I heard about Twice Exceptional, and the stories that you shared resonated with me. And, I think when we're in such a low moment with our kids, it's hard to see the strengths. It's hard to see what's good because we're in survival mode. And
Mhm.
so I remember that weekend, you really helped me see the possibilities. I call them the pebbles of possibilities that, our kids have. And I went home with my son and it changed everything for us. And that put me on a trajectory of all the research and, just finding out how to reach who he is and how to bring out who he is instead of just focusing on, the struggles and the deficits.
Yeah. And that's such a good point because I think, well, I know it's human nature is to fix whatever problem is around us. And
Yeah.
so we so easily fall into that let's fix the problem approach to anything we do as parents, right? We want to fix our kids, we want to help them so they can be absorbed into society, right? And we want to fix any problems that we're having at home, at work, wherever. And so we
Yeah.
naturally approach learning and parenting from that perspective. And when you have outside the box kids, it's a mental shift. We need to be able to start
Yeah.
seeing their strengths. They're not something that's broken that needs to be fixed. They're someone who needs to be
Yes.
approached differently to be able to find their potential and help them reach it.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
You
And
talk,
that's been our journey.
yeah. So, and I think that's a lot of our journeys, right? Is
Yeah.
relearning how to parent and how to teach, especially for us as homeschool families. And I wasn't one of those ones that knew from the beginning that I wanted to do that. My husband and I are and were both teachers. He's still teaching. And so, our kids were going to go through the system because the system worked. We
Yeah.
were part of the system. And when I left teaching, it was to write full time and not to homeschool my children. So we kind of came into it kicking and screaming a little bit. And in retrospect, it was the absolute best thing that we could have ever done for the kids that we have because we were able to meet them where they are and were all along the way and not kind of beat down
Yeah.
their spirit even in those times of crisis and challenge. And
Yeah.
we all had them. I've had them. And some of the stories are mine to share, and Michelle and I were just talking about that before we came on. Some stories aren't ours to share. As the kids get older,
Yeah.
problems become different and bigger, and we can't always share everything that's
Your
going on. I've had
stories.
extended family issues that aren't my story to share yet, but at some
Yeah.
point will be. And so Michelle and I are going to talk a little bit about homeschooling during crisis. Michelle has a really good perspective on how to approach, continuing and keeping going when times are hard, no matter what's
Yeah.
causing those hard times. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Michelle?
Yeah. So it started out, it's so funny because you say you came into homeschooling kicking and screaming. And there was a point in my life where I was continuing to homeschooling kicking and screaming because it got so hard. But I had the resolve to know that this was what was best for my kids. I just had to figure out how to navigate the difficult part of it. And it really started shortly after when I met with you at the conference. I remember my son sitting in a kitchen in a window seat right off our kitchen, and his shoulders were hunched down. He had a clipboard in his hand. He was working on an assignment that I had given him. And he looked at me with tears in his eyes and he said, I hate school. And I know I shared this story with you before, but I remember being devastated that this was one of our whys for homeschooling, was to inspire love of learning. And that wasn't happening. So I knew in that moment that it wasn't that he didn't love learning. He hated how he was feeling while he was learning. He hated the stress, the overwhelm, the tension, and the anxiety that was living in our home. Because if you rewind a little bit before that, my brother had died recently of a tragic accidental overdose. So it set a tsunami of challenges our way in our family. but I was still trying to trudge on, life is normal. Cause I think that's what we try to do.
Yeah.
Even when chaos is going on around us, we try and keep going as we've always been. And I realized that that wasn't working. But I knew I needed help too. So I reached out to a counselor. And that was one of the things I loved about you sharing, because you were one of the first people that I heard normalize that it's okay to reach out and get help through a counselor, not just for your kids, but for you
Mhm.
as a parent. And so that was one of the first phone calls I made. I was like, I know I need help. And I was grounded in my faith. I was grounded in community. I exercised. I was connected with my kids, a strong marriage, but I was drowning. I wasn't I was still in survival mode. So I reached out to him. And I remember a couple of the first meetings I had with him in his office. He had he called them the 8 C's of regulation on his wall. And he talked about, I'm going to read them to you here: calm, courage, curiosity, clarity, creativity, compassion, confidence, and connection. And I remember looking at all of those words on his wall, and I remember thinking, I am feeling anything but those things. But as he began to unpack them, he shared with me that these are our states of being when we're in a thriving mode. When we're in stress and we're in chronic stress and we're in survival mode, we cannot operate in these capacities because the brain isn't wired for success, and we don't need positive emotion to keep going in life. The brain is wired to keep us safe and in survival. So we're constantly, looking for what's negative. And I remember being kind of on this a wire where the tightrope, where you
Uh-huh.
stand on a
Yeah.
tightrope. And I remember feeling if I leaned a little bit to the left, I would fall into the pit of despair. And if I leaned a little bit to the right, I'd be gripped with anxiety. So I needed something to get me off of this tightrope. I needed kind of a wider bridge. And these are the things that really helped me have kind of a compass and a roadmap to say, this is what I want to get back to. This is what I need. And recognizing that calm and anxiety can't coexist, it was kind of figuring out, okay, if I'm anxious, how do I get back to that place of calm? And so for me, that's where it started. It started with recognizing that I was not in a place of calm. My internal world was, I needed to figure out what I needed for that. And a lot of it was slowing down and saying no to everything for a period of time. Like that's when I cut back, because again, we were trying to keep life as normal and that wasn't working for us. So I had to say no to everything and pull back and just kind of find out, what did I need to bring my body back to calm? Because a lot of times we hold all of that in our body. If you feel your shoulders are tense, your stomach's in knots, and you're just going, or you're quick to irritability, or snapping at your kids, and, you're anything but calm. And so I really started to just focus on, what do I need for me to get through calm? And that also looked different with how we homeschooled. We cut back on a lot of expectations, and we brought back play and moments of connection, and trying to I call it getting the light back in my son's eyes, because it had gone out. So it started with that. And, and then curiosity, I was learning that can't be curious and critical at the same time. So I was often very critical of myself. And if I was critical about myself, I was also critical towards my kids and what they were doing. And so when I started to see that come out, I knew I needed to be more curious about what was going on. And one of the mindset shifts for that came from Ross Green. And he talks about kids do well if they can.
Uh-huh.
And, your kid's not giving you a hard time, he's having a hard time. So being able to be curious instead of, okay, my kid's melting down again, or he's exploding or whatever, being curious about why. What is the stress that he's facing and he's dealing with? That really helped me kind of navigate that difficult journey that we were going through, and be curious about what's going on underneath the surface for him.
Yeah, I love that idea. There's so much in there, right? And I'd love to talk more about the 8 C's, but first, the permission that you gave yourself to slow down and say no, I think is something that most parents, especially homeschool parents, struggle with, because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, right? To be
Yeah.
all to our kids, because we are not farming out the actual education piece. Now,
Hmm.
some of us do in certain areas, but like I don't teach my kids math. CTC online teaches my kids math. So that there is an element to farming out within the homeschool, but I'm still responsible for everything. I've often said that, parenting is really hard and homeschooling is parenting on steroids. And so it's hard to give ourselves permission to slow down or
Yeah.
say no. So what would you say to a parent who's like, there's nothing I can stop doing. Like, how do I slow down? How do I say no? I don't want to, take away from my kids their
Yeah.
opportunity.
You're familiar with Tina Payne Bryson and
Yeah.
Dr. Dan
Mhm.
Siegel, and they wrote the book, The Power of Showing Up. I read that book during that time period too. It was introduced to me from my counselor, and they talk about the 4 S's that our kids need to feel seen, to feel safe, to feel soothed, and to feel secure. And when I read about that and learned about that, I realized that's what my kids need most than anything. They need that more than the activities. They need that more than the social connections if their emotional state is anxious. So when I began to narrow down and that's why we call it the homeschool essentials, because we began to narrow down what is essential for my kids' well-being, what is essential for their mental and emotional state. And a lot of that is their connection with us as their caregiver. And there's the studies that are on there that say the greatest indicator of our child's success is that there was one person in their life that showed up for them.
Mm.
And we show up for them by helping them feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure. So that became like, how am I doing that for my kids? And those are the things that I said yes to. And if the things that I was saying yes to took me away from providing that for my kids, that was an easy no for me. And it's not forever. Saying no is not forever. Like right now, I'm in this period of time where there's a lot of opportunities for yeses, and I have more clarity. And that's one of our other 8 C's of what I do want to say yes to, because they're life giving, not only for me, but for my family as well. And, and there's seasons with that. So some of the times we can say no to some things just for that season to get the mental health and the emotional stability and the calm back in our family. And then once that's there, then we can gradually add in other things. And it's also a collaboration with our kids. What is important to them to feel connected and safe and soothed? Because some of our kids are more social than others. So they may need more of those. And, it is a balancing act. But for me, it came, what do I need to be able to provide those 4 S's for my kids? And if it was causing me to be anxious and frantic when I was present with my kids, that's what I had to say no to. And nobody else can be that parent for my kids but me. Everybody else can volunteer and teach co-ops and, do other things, but I'm the only mom that's going to be present for my kids.
I think that's that last part is such a good reminder for all of us, right? There's always somebody that can pick up the slack, and whether that's your work if you work outside the home, or the co-op,
Yeah.
or the whatever, there's always someone else that can pick those outside things up, but nobody else can be mom to your kids. And so your responsibility, first and foremost, if I'm extrapolating from that, is to your kids. They need you to make the decisions about how you spend your time and your energy with them in mind. I've said before that we're our kids only example of what a healthy parenthood looks like, right? And while they have friends who've got parents and they sleep over or hang out with them and see those interactions, it doesn't matter how often somebody spends time with me over my house. I'm always a little bit different when my kids have
Yeah.
somebody over than when they don't, right? We just naturally are. And
Yeah.
so our kids see all of us, the good, the
Yeah.
bad, the ugly, the exhausted, the, filled, the filled buckets. And so,
The reactive.
yes. And so
Yeah. Yeah.
if we're not spending time cultivating that relationship, so they know what a healthy relationship between a mother and a son, or a mother and a daughter, or a husband and a wife
Yeah.
are, they're not seeing it anywhere. And so saying no sometimes preserves those relationships. I remember, and I think I've talked about it on here before. I know it's been in a post before, but when Trevor was very young, about the age that Tyler was when you and I first met, we really struggled with family gatherings, really struggled, especially those on my side. And this is something that will maybe someday make it into a podcast. And we've talked about family challenges in the background, and it's not a story for today, but we're not very close with my side of the family. And we tried for a long while, showing up at family gatherings and stuff, and it was a disaster. It was, he was judged, I was judged, my parenting was called into question. He was having a hard time. And it was very difficult to maintain the structure that we knew he thrived in, and the actions and the food and the eating habits and the types of play when we were at certain houses. And so we stopped. We just stopped
Yeah.
going to Thanksgiving and Christmas and birthday parties with the extended family on my side, because it was always setting us up for failure, and
Yeah.
especially setting him up for failure. And that came with a lot of flack from,
Yeah.
my side of the family. Like, why aren't you coming? Everybody has to deal with that, this, that, and the other. And you don't, right? Even
Yeah.
when it's family,
Yep.
even when it's your best friend and you've always gotten together, if it's not a healthy situation or a successful situation for your immediate family, your kids, it is not
Yeah.
only right, but it's just to step back and
Yes.
then give your kids a different, perspective. We went to a friend's house last year for Thanksgiving for the first time since Trevor was like 6. So really the first
Mhm.
time for any of my kids that they remember. And it was lovely, but it wasn't the
Yeah.
food my kids were used to eating, and
Yep.
so this year we were invited back, and this particular friend is very understanding. And my kids said to me, I'm like, I want to talk to the kids, see what they think. And they said, "Can we go for dessert? But can you make the
Okay.
turkey and the stuffing and the mashed potatoes that you usually make so we can eat just us at home?" Because they
Yeah.
missed what they had found as their comfort and their safe place and their safe foods. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to make a whole bunch of desserts.
Yeah.
We're going to bring them over. We're going to go in the evening, and they're going to get their meal that started when we pulled away from the extended family, because they see that
Yeah.
as their home place. Hey there. Okay, so I've been talking about CTC math for years now, and there are very good reasons for that. First of all, they're so supportive of all the different things that homeschoolers do and need in order to be successful. And it's just a really great program. It is adaptable, and you get access to all the different grade levels at a time. There is a money-back guarantee. Like, how can you pass that up? How many curriculum companies out there give you a money-back guarantee? If the program is not working for your kids, you can reach out to them. They will help you out, try to figure out and troubleshoot what needs to be done to help your kiddos be successful. And if it's still not working, they will give you your money back. On top of that amazing guarantee, you have access to all the math grade levels from K to 12. So we're talking all the way through calculus. And so your kids can progress at the rate they need to progress at. So if your kids are super mathy and want to complete a couple grade levels in a year so they can get ahead and do some more specialized mathematics maybe in their high school years because they want to give themselves a leg up as they're getting ready for college, or if they're a little bit slower in math and they want to take some more time, they can take a year and a half to 2 years to do a grade level, whatever you need to do. Or even if you have switched programs to CTC, you can go back and just tackle the areas, the lessons where maybe there was a gap that your kids need to be updated in so that they can be more successful and move forward. You have access to all of it, so you can fully customize your kids' math experience. It's fantastic. For our family, we've got a couple kids using it right now. One of them likes to do math in a more methodical, kind of day by day, 7 days a week approach. And that particular child does one lesson a day, 7 days a week, and moves forward kind of slowly. And then if there's a lesson that they don't get, they bounce back and they do that lesson again and again until they reach mastery, and then they move on to the next lesson. And that works for that particular kid. I've got one kiddo who loves math and loves the idea of being ahead of grade level. And so that particular kid does a minimum of 2 lessons, 5 days a week, and often still does 2 lessons a day on the weekends. So we're talking 10 to 14 lessons of math a week for this particular kiddo, because this kid's goal is to whip through math as quickly as possible so they can say they were ahead of traditionally schooled kids in the school district where my husband teaches, which I just think is a crack up. I'm not the only one though. I get emails all the time from listeners just like you who have tried CTC Math because they've heard about it on the podcast or read about it in one of my newsletters, and they just wanted to let me know that it was working for them. Like this email that I got from Rachel. Hi Colleen, my son was really struggling with math until I tried out CTC. He is doing phenomenally right now after just a few months. I love the program and he loves it too. He feels confident and is all geared up and ready to go, even through the summer. I do the weekly revisions, and I was wondering if I appreciate you and this resource you shared. Thank you so much. Keep up the great work. Well, Rachel, you keep up the great work too, because this is a testament to how adaptable and easygoing CTC is. Kids coming from different programs can jump right in and be successful, and even are motivated to keep going through the summer with their math. All right, check them out if you haven't had a chance to already, ctcmath.com. If you have any questions, reach through their customer support or email me and let me know that you have a question, and I'll see if I can help you get the answer to it. Let's get back to today's episode.
Yeah. And a lot of the purpose of gathering is that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when the judgment and the criticism and all of that comes on, because we've experienced that with our family as well, that breaks apart the connection.
Yeah.
And that's what our kids want. They want to feel like they're valued and known and understood. And we went through that with our family. And that was one of the no's I had to say as well, because being around certain family members created turmoil in me.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I would go home, I was wrestling with that with my kiddos. And so I needed to create healthy boundaries around where I felt safe emotionally. And if I wasn't safe emotionally in that environment, then I needed to put a boundary on that, because I had to show up for my kids during the crisis we were going through. And in that particular scenario, it was a family crisis. So it was our extended family that was dealing with the crisis in a different way. But I had to be present for my kids during that crisis and not take care of the adults that could take care of themselves, but they weren't getting the healthy strategies that they needed. They were spiraling in unhealthy, and I couldn't spiral in unhealthy. I had to be healthy for my kids. And, even when I said no to a lot of those things, I was president of our co-op at that point, where I was committed to a 3-year term, and I was only in the second term. And I had to tell them no. And it was a hard no, because it was something I loved doing, but it was taking away from what I needed to be. So some of our no's are hard.
Mm-hmm.
They're like saying no to family. That's hard.
Yeah.
But I will tell you, saying no to my family has also given me a greater resolve to have healthier connections with my own kids, because I've seen what those unhealthy dynamics within a family does. And over time, you may just roll with it because of the expectations, and you go home and you decompress afterwards, but in the long run, it's not really worth it if they're not healthy. And I want to create healthy foundations in my relationship with my kids that's going to last far into their adulthood, when they have kids, that we're the safe place that they want to come home to, not the place that they don't feel safe.
Yes. I think that's such a great point, and something that, especially when we're in the trenches with little ones. We were talking again before we started recording about the difference, right, with little ones versus big ones. The problems are different, and people say, I think it's almost like it's kind of trite, bigger kids, bigger problems. And I think that that's a simplification of the issue. I think that the problems aren't necessarily bigger, they're just different, and they're more personal to our kids, right? I think when kids are little, the exhaustion is just their energy, right? It's just keeping up with their energy throughout a day. But we get to make the schedule. We get to choose what they participate in, and things like that. And then when our kids are older, yes, the problems are more, they're deeper, they're more personal to them. We're helping them really figure out who they are through their challenges and problems. But also for us, the challenges are our schedules aren't our own anymore, because we need to get our kids to where they need to be, and they're choosing activities and things to do with their friends that have their own timelines. And so oftentimes I mean, it's like a running joke. I am able to work from my car. My husband does not. And so
Yep.
I end up taking the kids where they need to go because I can kill the hour and a half that I'm waiting for them because we've
Yeah.
driven 45 minutes to get there and he wouldn't be able
So
to.
I'm not the only one that works in my car.
No, I think that's so
Yeah.
universal and not talked about,
Yeah.
right? I
Yeah.
remember I took Molly, she wanted to go thrifting with some new friends from theater. And the theater that she was working with is a private all boys high school that recruits girls from the community and other schools for their shows. And it's a wonderful program. I wish we'd discovered it her freshman year and not her sophomore year because it's really nurturing great people, good kids, but because it's a private school, they come from all different areas. So they wanted to go thrifting. They found this place that had some really cute little thrift shops centrally located, but we were
Okay.
slightly further than central. And so I ended up finding a parking garage that I could sit at the top of, get some sun and
Work.
get some work while my daughter was downstairs, on the cute little quaint because I didn't want to cramp her style either. Right. So
Yeah.
he's shopping in all these cute little shops and having boba and getting lunch,
Yeah.
and I'm like with my packed sandwich and my
In your
Coke in
car.
my car getting sun through the windshield and working. But we do this right because our
Yep.
kids need that space, and because of the whole point to me bringing that up, we want them to want to come back,
Yeah.
building the relationship with them, being there for them to help them, you know, build other relationships outside of us, and then be a sounding board as they're figuring out if those relationships are healthy or not healthy, and
Yeah.
listening to them when they want to talk and being there for them and supporting them builds a relationship and a foundation that they want
Yeah.
to come back to. They're not worried about telling us things because of what we might how we might react. They're
Right.
excited to tell us because they know we want their success as much as they do. And then
Yeah.
that bleeds into when they leave us, them wanting to come back, having the Thanksgiving dinner that they want is a simple way to build those rituals that they want to come back to. And then
Yeah.
having those conversations as you're driving home from sitting in the parking garage for 3 hours shows them that you're there for them and willing to be there for them, and then talk them through whatever it is they're experiencing.
Yeah. Yeah. And what I'm learning is the time that we take with our kids in that situation. And it's another one of our 8 C's is it builds the confidence in knowing their abilities and their worth. And a lot of times if we're so busy and we're powering through the difficult crisis and the difficult time just to get the box checked through school or through work or through whatever we're trying to do, our kids can start to shut down in that. And when we make the space to be available for them and take them to the places that they want to go and have the conversations with them, it's building their confidence in a way that we sometimes don't see immediately.
Right.
But when they can bounce conversation off of you and you can reiterate back to them, hey, I see this in you, or, that was great. Again, it's that safe place that we're creating for them. I wasn't there when I was in that hectic state, though, because it was so busy. It was always, I don't have time for this. I got to go get this done. I got to go do this. And when I started to slow down and be that for my kids, even though it felt like we weren't doing as much and outside of the home and different things that we were doing, that time was not wasted. And I'm seeing the fruit of that now. My kids are back in co-op this year because we said no to co-op because the sensory needs of my son during that time when he was under so much stress, he couldn't handle things that were going on at the co-op and the behavior. We talked a little bit about, Mona Delahook's book, the Beyond Behavior. His behavior was showing all the signs of what was going on underneath of what was happening. So lowering the sensory input and lowering the demands on his life helped get him back to that place of calm, but it built his confidence. And so now that we're back at co-op, the things that he used to shut down and resist doing, he's now thriving. And I just had the privilege of sitting in his high school. They did marine biology this year, and he had to present on a report. And I haven't shared the story before because it just happened, but I got to sit in watching him do his report. And there were years where getting him to do a report like that would have been like pulling teeth. Like it would be really hard. But at this point, he was loving what he was doing. He was interested in the material. And he just had this confidence that he could show up and be who he was. And I watched all the other kids do the report as well. And a lot of them read their paper, just looking at the paper, or they read their trifold board. And my son got up there and he started with a story and a joke because he did sharks, the great white shark. And I don't even remember all of the information that he presented, but what I remember is that he stood up there feeling confident in what he knew. The learning became a knowing to him. It became something that he was excited about, and it was his own learning. And I attribute that a lot to just providing that safe place for him to be who he was and not put expectations on him and demands on him that were what other people would have thought he needed, and to see him thrive. So all that to say, when we say no to things, like back to your original question, like how do we say no to these things? I think sometimes we need permission to say no. So if people need that permission, you have it, because that no is worth it for when they get older, and what the fruit is going to bear when your kids are older. Yeah. So just watching their confidence bloom is a huge, and that comes by slowing down and taking risks, because we don't always feel confident with what we're doing, and we can't take risks if we're under fear and under stress. And so just watching him be able to take the risks has been a huge reward to see that come out.
Okay, quick question here. So for
Yeah.
people who are listening and are like, I don't know how to do that, what is something like a practical piece of advice? Like, what does that look like, right? So we say no to co-op, we say no to the outside activities or whatever it is that's causing us stress or sensory overload. But what if it's math? What if it's language art? Like, how do you say no and still teach your kid? Because I know that that's a question people are having listening.
Yeah.
As you and I have been talking about theories, and we've been talking about, Dan and Tina and Ross Green and Mona Delhook.
Yeah.
But what does that look like as a homeschool mom who still has to, I have to sign off right at the end of the year in my assessments and stuff. How do we do that?
Yeah. So what I love about our state law in Florida is for homeschooling, it says the child must show progress commensurate with their ability. So it's not that they have to hit a benchmark at certain periods of time. And I think when we're in a state of crisis, the most important thing is safety for our kids, emotional safety. And learning is always happening, always. It just may look different for a period of time. So there was a season with my son and my husband, especially, they chose to watch Marvel movies. Every Friday night was Marvel night with dad, because their connection was broken during that state of crisis. So they needed something to build that back. And it may seem trite, like, oh, your kid's watching Marvel movies, but the level of discussion that they had, and if you watch these movies, they're based out of, historical events. Like, they interweave so many different things of culture into these movies. And so they had just really big, juicy conversations that later on, as he began to read more literature, higher level literature, and got back into more of a different way of learning, he was making connections to the movies that he was watching. That learning that he was doing later became more real. So when I look at that and realize that learning is always happening, it just may look different. And just because you narrow down how you're learning for a season doesn't mean that it's stifling their growth, because they're still making progress. It's just different. When it came to math, with math, it wasn't, and it still is like this for my daughter, because my daughter has dyscalculia. So math is really a challenge for her, and it's not her favorite thing to do. We stayed consistent with doing a little bit of math a day, but it wasn't a rigorous, you have to do the whole lesson, you have to do all the math problems. It was, how much can we tackle today? And some days it was just watching the lesson and getting the information. And other days it was watching the lesson, doing a few practice problems, and growing. Some days it was playing games for math. So it was kind of watching where their level of stress was at and where my capacity was. Because if I wasn't able to do it and I was going to be irritable and angry and yell at my kids, math wasn't going to happen, because it wasn't going to, they weren't going to learn anyway, right? So when they're under stress, they're not going to learn. And then, there were times that we would just, and we still do this, we bring in comforts. My daughter has a candle she just got gifted for her birthday. So we save that candle for math time. We sit down at the table, we literally light the candle, and it has these LED lights that wire up and go on when the candle gets lit. And, she has her her wall of slime that she collects. I know slime is like was a big thing a while back, but it's still a big thing for my daughter. And she'll bring her slime out to the table and kind of work through that because the sensory helps her. And we just try and make math connecting and not this, we have to get it done to get it done. And sometimes it's good. And sometimes it's we just get a little bit done and we move on. Because I know the next day there's going to be more. And I know even for if you're looking at it over years, if our kids are under, and we're talking about homeschooling in crisis. So this isn't just we've had a bad day, or this is like when you have a death in the family, you have a new baby, you had a tragedy happen. When you're under crisis and you slow down a little bit, the brain isn't going to learn when it's under stress anyway, because it's wired for safety and connection. So if you build on the safety and connection, when the wiring is back and the positive emotions are back, the learning is going to take off later. So it's not that the learning isn't going to grow, but if you continue the learning while they're under stress, it's just the shutdown is going to happen even more. And so my gauge is always is the light in my kids' eyes. And, some days they may not like it, but
Right.
if the difference between stress and shutdown and just, I'm not in the mood to do it today, but let's find ways that we can get out of that mood to get it done. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
And
I think it's gauging which one is which.
well, and like you said, there's a difference between, and if you're in tune with your kids, right? And you've done the work to know who your kids are, you'll be able to discern whether it is, I just don't want to do this today, versus
Yeah.
this is a piece of a bigger problem, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
like you were saying in there, when we're in crisis, whether that is a family situation, a relational issue, kids having some kind of whatever it is, bullying's going on, homeschoolers are not immune to friend issues
Yeah.
and things like that. And whatever it is a different experience than, I'm having a couple bad days. We need to take a break and, have ice cream for dinner.
Yeah.
But the connection between you and your children, the relationship is the most important because of a couple things. Like Michelle was saying, your brain's not going to learn anyway when it's in a crisis mode. And we were talking earlier about building this place for our kids to want to come back to. At the core of all of that is the relationship. And it's a lot harder to rebuild a damaged relationship than it is to remediate a math situation or, to catch you up on some grammar. When you are at calm and you feel safe and you feel connected and you feel loved, all of those skills can be learned more easily and quickly
Yes.
than if you're constantly fighting a broken relationship. So if it's hurting the relationship, you need to step back and try to fix that and connect and connect and connect. And it might be connecting through, Marvel movies or whatever. My husband and I were just talking about this the other day because the we were talking about learning and his perception. He is still a teacher, and so he's still in the school system all the time, and it's very cut and dry, how
Yep.
kids are taught in school and whatnot.
Yeah.
And we were talking about how kids learn and how they don't need to really how the brain retains information, right? It's why teaching to the test works in a school setting because the kids' brains are going to retain the information for a maximum of 14 days. So if they're building for the test, they do the test and then they forget it. But research also shows that if they're learning for its own sake, they're retaining it for longer. Yep. And he said that there's been a point with each of our kids where he's been like, okay, they're going to be okay. Like, as a teacher in the system, he still worries, like, are we doing the right thing with homeschooling? And then there's something each of them says at some point or does that he's like, okay, no, we're actually on the right track. We're doing fine. And with my daughter, they were playing a game. They were playing a game called Schmovie, which is very similar to like Apples to Apples, but that you're given scenarios and you're creating a movie title based on these randomly drawn characteristics of the movie. And the titles that Molly was coming up with making the connections between like who the characters are and what the setting is and what genre of movie it is was just blowing him away because they were rooted in history and true
Yep.
crime and
Yeah.
things that she had read about or listened to on podcasts. And it was at that point he was like, she's really bright. And the
Yeah.
connections she's making are so higher level that this
Yeah.
is fascinating and interesting. And she is going to be just fine because she can learn whatever it is
Yeah.
she needs to learn. And so we need to remember that if the connections and the learning can happen in so many different ways, but the connection has to trump the
Yep.
education,
Yeah.
because everything else will come as a result.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I struggled with that at the beginning because you hear that all the time. Don't sacrifice your relationship for academics, but like you asked at the beginning, as a homeschooler, how do you do that? Because you still got to get the learning done.
Right.
But when I realized that it's more about getting their brain back to a place of being able to learn, and that takes the safety and connection with us. That's when I started to really understand how to put the relationship above academics. Because it wasn't just that academics are going to go out the window. It's let's first provide safety and connection. And, for those that are wondering and in fear of, well, if I do, we talk about unschooling and deschooling and stuff like that. If I do that, there's this fear of, am I doing enough? And am I going to give them what they need for the future? And I've learned to reframe that. Instead of asking, am I doing enough? Asking, am I doing what matters? And sometimes in a season of crisis, what matters is that emotional safety. Later on, you can deal with the academics. And I can testify now that my son is 17 and about to graduate, he's thriving in his learning and he's doing research papers on his own that I never thought he would do. He's executing tasks with all of that executive function that we struggled with for years that I never thought he would do. He's confident in who he is and how he's wired and how he learns, and he's been given space to learn deep instead of broad. And I think sometimes when we're checking the boxes, we're learning broad, and our kids who are bright and quirky and gifted, they need to learn deep on things that are interesting to them. And then when they get to do that, the little things that they do need to do, if they want to go to college or they want to take a certain course, they're more readily to check that box because they know it's relevant to what they want to do, not just they have to do it because mom put it on the assignment sheet.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's really, really good. Okay, so we could talk forever.
I know.
And I think that Michelle and I were talking about having her come back and have like a part 2 to this conversation in a little bit of a different direction next week. So we're going to have Michelle back and keep this conversation going. Before I let you go though, what is one thing, so based on what we talked about today, what is one thing that you could leave parents with that would be like your best piece of advice based on what we talked about that they could do right now to help with their mindset, with their kids, whatever it is that they need? What would you say to them is the most important thing to take away from this conversation?
Compassion comes to mind, and that was one of the C's that we didn't cover, but that's what sticks out to me because I think having compassion on yourself first as the mom and as the educator to realize you're doing more than you realize you're doing
Yeah.
because you care and you're showing up for your kids, learning to have compassion on yourself and being able to extend that compassion to your kids because the compassion is what bridges the connection. And I think that, and whatever that looks like for you as the parent, sometimes compassion for me is putting my hand over my chest and realizing, okay, today was a bad day, but I'm not a bad mom. We just had a bad day because we can spiral into those thoughts, and those toxic thoughts are what cause the anxiety in our home. So learning to have compassion for yourself has been a huge game changer in my life and in my relationship with my kids.
I love that. And that goes right with what you were saying a few minutes ago, reframing, am I doing enough, to am I doing what matters most? And, that's showing yourself and your kids compassion, right? So
Yeah.
I love that. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me. This was a treat.
Yeah, it was great. And for those of you listening, we'll be back same time, same place next week with another conversation with Michelle. So don't miss it. All of Michelle's links will be over in the show notes at raisinglifelonglearners.com/podcast. And yeah, we'll be back same time, same place. In the meantime, while you're waiting, enjoy your kids. Take a walk, take some time to connect, and really, really just enjoy the opportunity that you have to pour into the kids that you have. You are a great mom. and you are doing enough.